Welcome to This Sustainable Life, the premier community on learning to live sustainably. Are you trying to live sustainably? Me too. Enjoy the process? Me too. To hear heads of government, business, culture, sports, and everywhere also doing it, changing government and corporations. I've been on my journey of environmental sustainability for years. My guests and I have learned and share on sustainable food, sustainable farming, sustainable travel, and more. This podcast shares my results, often opinionated, and world-class guests I lead on how to be more sustainable. You're about to hear an episode originally recorded audio only. You'll hear the original podcast name, Leadership in the Environment, because I focus a lot on leadership. Subscribe, upvote, share, and tell everyone about it. We're growing fast. Now here's the episode.
Deming said that really the role of the senior leader is two things. One is to look out ahead, to scan the horizon, to be looking for opportunities, how to make the pie bigger, what are the innovations that we need to be looking for. And he said, don't worry about your competitor, because if you're worried about your competitor, you're already beaten. So it's not that you're ignoring your competitor, but the point is to try to make the pie bigger through innovation. The second thing is to help put everybody in the organization to work on the transformation to the new way of thinking, to the new philosophy of management. So that's the role of the senior leader. And the role of the manager then is to help do several things. One, help people be successful within the system and processes and procedures, and to be continually improving those, rather than trying to hold individuals accountable, because through the math, through the control chart thinking, we can prove that about 94, 95, 96, 97% of the time, the outputs are the result of the system, not the result of an individual. But yet most HR people are taught to, and other leaders are taught to look and blame people. And they're only about 6% of the issue. So we're spending 97% of our resources on 3% of the problem. We need to flip that. That's thinking differently. I'm going to suggest to you, and I don't know the answer to this, but I'm going to suggest to you that applying that thinking to environmental stewardship is exactly what has to happen.
Welcome to the award-winning Leadership in the Environment podcast. We guide you to living better by your values. We bring you relevant views on important topics without doom and gloom. We focus on awareness and action. It's about bringing fun, community, and connection to your everyday life. If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing and turning on notifications. Let's do this. Kelly Allan is experienced in the theory, practice, and community of Edwards Deming. If you don't know Deming, you'll hear from this conversation. But for context, personally, growing up, my top role models were Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Thoreau, Mandela, people like that. They were for leadership, but for sustainability, as I practiced, I realized acting in harmony with nature and helping others to change, to act by deeper values than they led day to day, it differed from those leaders. New role models emerged for me. General Patton, Eisenhower, Muhammad Ali. Then came Deming. Deming transformed a war-destroyed Japan starting in 1950 after helping win World War II on the US side in a way comparable and a magnitude comparable to developing radar or cracking the Nazis' codes for sending their secret messages. Not something on the front line, but equally valuable for winning the war effort. That's the scale of what Deming did. Not many people know him outside of the Deming world. Kelly has been learning and teaching Deming for decades. This episode may run long, but recording these words now, just after recording our conversation, I'm as enthusiastic, motivated, and optimistic as from any conversation. I think you'll feel the same way, hearing what there is to learn and apply from such a successful on a national and global scale of what Deming did. In a time frame that we have, he turned around Japan in under 5 years. Not just him alone. He was part of a lot of other people, but he played a major role. Kelly and I talk about specific ways to follow up just knowing a transformation of a nation without hope in under 5 years is possible to specific next steps. Here's Kelly Allan. Welcome to the Leadership in Environment podcast. This is Joshua Spuddock. I'm here with Kelly Allan. Kelly, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you.
Great to have you here. And you are an expert on W. Edwards Deming practice and theory. Is that about right?
Yeah, well, X is an unknown quantity and spurt's a shot of water. So I guess that I think those of us in the Deming community balk at that kind of terminology. But I know some things about Deming, definitely.
Well, I've heard you on podcasts and I saw your one-on-one on Deming. And it seemed you had experience, and it seemed that you've worked with people who, after they work with you, they say it changed a lot in ways beyond what they thought they'd get more efficient, or they thought they'd get more effective, and it changed their relationships with everyone, things like that.
Well, that's nice to hear. Yes, that's trying to make that difference is a key thing to our philosophy. Absolutely. So thank you for that.
Well, I guess for some grounding, I want to talk to you about the practice, about the theory, but maybe, do you mind if I ask, how did you get started? What led you in this direction?
I was lucky enough to hear the original If Japan Can, Why Can't We NBC documentary in which Deming's featured. And I thought, this guy knows things. And he's already 80 years old. So if you want to find some stuff out, you should probably start investigating, because he had just been discovered in this country. So from there, I started, Out of the Crisis was published. And sometime later, I started going to Deming conferences and reading more and more about what other people had been writing. And even Jim Collins was one of the early advocates of Deming back in the 80s. So there was a lot of activity going on. And the more I learned about it, the more sense it made to me, both efficient and effective and humane.
Yeah, that humane is the unexpected part, I think, for a lot of people. And there's so much emotion in it, and so much dignity and expectation of we all have passion. I don't know if this is the right terminology, but we all have this passion in us. We all want to show up to work and give our all and really be a part of a team.
I would agree with all that. The dignity of work, he referred to it as pride and joy in work, and that we're all born wanting to make a difference. And that gives us life. That gives us energy. That's the part of that well of intrinsic motivation. That's where that comes from.
And I'm going to jump right into my interest here, because I just said this to you. I heard about him more than 15, almost 20 years ago now. And I thought, okay, that's kind of cool. If I ever go into operations, I'll keep that in mind. Now that stewardship has become very important to me, in sustainability, systemic change, then he's become a role model. And I haven't worked with his stuff very long or in great detail, but it feels like what he was able to do in Japan in the time frame that he did it is a sort of change that we could use these days. I'm not sure of that scale and that joy. I mean, the emperor gave him an award. That seems pretty big. And it seems like before he got there, I don't know what it was like. I would guess that they were in disarray, having World War II having ended. The industry could not have been very effective at that time. The reputation, I think, was, I guess, low quality, low price, and probably not even worth the price. And I don't know what sense of community they had or what the culture there was like. But he's not Japanese. I don't think of Japanese as normally being like, let's bring in an outsider. I don't know the culture in the 50s. And within a few years, they had transformed. The world was responding to them. They were leaders. And I don't think there could have been much of cracking the whip or him telling them what to do. It must have been all him inviting them and working with them and collaborating. This, to me, seems an incredible model to apply to, say, the United States with our environmental situation.
I would agree. And one of the things he talked about is that he didn't take the traditional style of thinking or leadership or management to Japan. He taught them a new way to think and a new way to lead. And that's what made a huge difference. So he was invited in by them, and then he invited them to start sharing his thinking. And I suppose as learners, they were ready. As you say, the country was devastated by the war, and they were looking for a means to recover. And it was so successful. And I don't know I'm not saying it was easy, but the key with Deming is not so much that it's hard to learn. I mean, he really has the four elements of the system of profound knowledge, and then quality tools. And, most people can learn four things. He's not talking about 40 or 400 things you have to learn, but four things, which are a lens, a different way to see the world. And that's what's challenging for most people, is to take that step from the traditional bubble to actually even recognize that that traditional thinking is a bubble and to get at least a leg out of that, a foot out of that into a new way of thinking. And once that starts and people see how much more humane it is, how much better it is in terms of costs go down and quality goes up, productivity goes up, profitability goes up. If you're a nonprofit, effectiveness goes up, joy in work goes up, everything that you want improves, and there aren't the negative unintended consequences that come from the traditional way of management. So in terms of the environment, he would see the world as a system and probably larger than the world because the environment extends well into space as well. So he would see our ecosystem truly as a system, and we are inputs to that system, and how we interact with that system, respect that system, improve that system would fit with his model that if you understand what the aim is, your costs will go down and your quality will go up. And he was the magic of Deming. One of the first things that he had that nobody else had, as far as I've ever read, is that it used to be believed that if you wanted higher quality, you had to have higher costs. And Deming said, if you will think differently, you can have higher quality and lower costs. And that is the Holy Grail. That is the incredible insight that he had. And of course, it's true. It's true.
Did the insight come from him just thinking that, or did it come from the statistics that he brought in from the census? And
I think it was probably a combination. I don't know for a fact, and I've read a variety of things about that. My sense is that he was probably a genius. He did have ways of connecting dots that were different from other people. But as a physicist, he understood, mathematical physicist, he understood that math and how you can look at things through a lens of understanding variation. And that if you can segment variation into the two categories of special cause and common cause, now you know how to go to work on the variation. And as you reduce the variation, quality improves and costs go down. But most people are never taught that there's two types of variation. And if you apply the wrong strategy to variation, you're going to typically make things worse. So if you try to fix something that's special by using a common cause approach, or you try to use a special cause approach, go find out why that number is different from the other numbers, you'll make things worse. If it's a common cause system, that number is to be expected, is predictable within the system.
I'm trying to get if Deming's approach applies to stewardship, to sustainability, would the best course be is it strictly applying what he taught corporations or corporate leaders, or is it going a step back? And I don't think that stewardship is a matter of producing a product or a service.
No, environmental stewardship is, if we'd say the aim is to create a sustainable, healthy environment, because he stressed the importance of having an aim. So if the aim is to, and maybe you have a better operational definition of what that aim is, but that environmental stewardship has to have an aim, which might be to make sure that that we're preserving and protecting ourselves and the planet and everything in it. So that's something you would be able to measure and see and evaluate. So in that case, if we do it in ways that make sense, our costs of doing that will decrease as the quality of the environment improves. That makes sense?
It makes sense in the abstract, and how it comes to happen. There's no there's no right now current leader.
Right.
And this weird thing for me is like feeling that the mantle is coming upon me. And very commonly people say, well, like when I talk to corporations, they say, well, yeah, we'd like to work on sustainability. They view it as a branding thing. They view it as something that, they'll get that there's demand from customers, from shareholders, from the media, from the government, and they get that there's something to do there. They generally want to delegate it, which I think is not possible. Well, it's possible. I don't think you can delegate it and be effective. And they also think it's going to drive up costs, or it's going to be something that they have to pay for that doesn't have immediate or possibly any benefits other than perhaps a bit more customer retention.
And that's the key. You've hit on several important things there. One is that if you view the environment and sustainability, stewardship, sustainability through the traditional lens of cost benefit, one misses the insights of thinking differently, to ask the questions about what's going on here psychologically, what's going on here in terms of the system, what's going on in terms of variation across these things we're looking at in the environment, and how do we go about improving things. So those are those four lenses. And he also addressed these kinds of issues. The system of profound knowledge is a philosophy. It's a way of thinking. It's a way of living, not just a way of leading and managing. So those of us who've studied it, it informs every part of our lives. I have associates who've raised their children in a different way because of Deming, and they think about schooling in a different way because of Deming. He also said that in terms of these kinds of challenges, if you have a board, if you have leaders who understand it and look at it not just from cost benefit, but from transformation, then that's a very effective lever, right? So if you have leaders who are interested in truly making a difference and want to learn how to do that in a new way, that's useful. But he also said that kind of quality, right? So we're talking about the quality of the environment. And quality not only starts in, quote, the boardroom, unquote, with leaders, but the transformation also starts with the individual and individual action, individual learning. So there's where I think that fits very well with the kinds of things that I've seen you do with your TED Talks, et cetera, is what is that I can do and not limit myself to traditional thinking. It's the what if thinking. And then you try things. And that's very Deming. That's a plan, do, study, act cycle, right? You have a theory, you have a plan, you make a prediction. If I do this, then this will result. You do it, you study the results, and then you do the next cycle.
Everyone looks at what I do, and probably if I've spoken to 100 people about what I do, at least 99 say, but what one person does doesn't make a difference. And
I reject that. And I think Deming would reject that, in part because he was one person who changed the world. So,
and in terms of the perspective, the viewpoint, that's a viewpoint of measuring the result of this one thing. Whereas my perspective is that this is how you learn what to do. If you don't, there's a couple examples I give, but one of it, most people get in most performance-based things, if you try to play tennis by reading books, you will not learn how to play tennis. But also, if you think just practicing a few ground strokes is going to get you to Wimbledon, it won't either, but that's how you get there.
Well, yeah, so that's another. So one of Deming's four areas of the system of profound knowledge is something called theory of knowledge. And what it basically says is that experience without theory teaches nothing. Without theory, there is no experience that you can apply to anything. So you have to your point, if you want to learn how to play tennis, it might be useful to read some theory about how to handle a racket and how to position yourself on the court. But when you start to play, then those theories start to either prove themselves out for you, or they prove themselves out in certain times, but not in other times. So you know when to use them and not to use them. But there's nothing more practical than theory, but it has to be informed by then going to try something and studying the results. So that's why I would also reject then that one individual can't make a difference for a whole lot of reasons. The power of personal commitment, that joy in making a difference, it's intrinsic motivation with a capital I.
Yeah, that joy, I'm constantly talking about joy. When I started avoiding packaged food, I started saying how my diet became very bland for a while, and then I stuck with it. And then it stopped being just steamed vegetables, and I started putting stuff together. And then it became really delicious. And then delicious, I was saying, find your delicious. But then delicious changed to community and connection and joy. And I keep saying joy, and people are like, what are you talking about? I'm like, I can't describe how people who feel it, and they know it too.
Yeah, I'm not sure what your theory is about that. I have a theory that basically says, and this is Deming again, So many people are conditioned by their work environment to exist in a prison, that they become victims, that they become helpless and without hope. So it becomes a vicious cycle rather than a virtuous cycle. And you have to be able to break out of that system in some way, either in your personal life, if you can, in your business life, to be able to start experience joy. Because otherwise, it's a constant grind. I mean, one of the jokes I like is person goes into work and sees the boss. The boss says, "The boss told me have a great day, so I went home." That's really sad. Right?
Yeah.
That's I don't want to work in that kind of environment. But let's face it, when you see the polls and the results, very few people like their jobs.
Yeah, there's this dichotomy that is business or environment. And
doesn't work.
Yeah, the listeners can't see this, but you're just like, he's just, no, not at all. His head nodding back and forth.
It doesn't work, right? I mean, the sense of that's a false choice, right? It's not a false choice in the traditional way of thinking, right? The traditional way of thinking says if you're going to have a higher quality environment, your costs are going to go up. That is not the Deming magic. The Deming magic is the quality of the environment can go up as our costs of achieving it are going down. That requires a different way of thinking. That requires a commitment to learning. And if most people are burnt out by the time they get home from work, they're not so interested in learning. Mm-hmm. They're tired. So that's why it's people like you who have to lead this, because that is your commitment. That is your work now, at least in part of your work. And work is enjoyable as well as should be enjoyable as well as making a difference.
I find it invigorating. Yeah. I mean, of course I get tired at the end of the day too, but that's a fatigue. There's an exhaustion that's like, doing drudge work, but there's also exhaustion of like having really fun with your nieces and nephews when you're like, that was great. That's the exhaustion I get. I was at a conference, a small one-day conference of, it was the fashion industry. It was at BCG, Boston Consulting Group here in New York. It was for the fashion industry about fulfillment, about how do they deliver stuff. This was before the pandemic. I got the whole room to look at me all of a sudden because all of them were talking about how to make their processes more efficient, self-driving trucks and things like that, computer systems to manage inventory. And I said, I don't remember exactly how to put it. I'll paraphrase myself as best I can. If everyone makes themselves more efficient, you guys will just become more efficient. Your prices will drop. People order more stuff. No, but your profits won't go up, and you'll just be just as competitive. You won't gain you'll gain momentary market share, but then you'll be back where you are. Except you'll be selling more stuff, and more stuff is going to go into landfills. And it was about sustainability and fulfillment. And systemic change means that you guys would do stuff differently and not competitively. And people came up to me afterward and they're like, yes, that's what we need. But no one was interested in doing that. No one saw that as something to be done.
Yeah, I understand that. They probably did not know that it's possible. They've not seen a way, an example of how that works. I mean, most of us want to be able to know that a pathway that we're going down will lead us to where we hope to go. So without that kind of intervention, or without that kind of awareness or deeper interest, they have their marching orders. They have their job to do.
Yeah. And they can call themselves leaders, but I would call them managers at best, and which is not a put down. It's just a different domain. And if their goal, there's this huge drive toward efficiency. And if you make a system that pollutes more efficient, you'll pollute more efficiently. That is, you'll get more pollution with less effort. And we've been making ourselves more efficient forever, certainly since the Industrial Revolution. Our problem isn't that we're not efficient enough. It's the total waste. That's the outcome. I mean, it's the total waste and what the waste is. I mean, now it's plastic and dioxin. It's not just like manure. And to me, ultimately, it's the values driving that create the goals that's the most important thing to change. As I see it, the two big ones of our three big ones are that we're trying for growth. And the counterpart that I wanted to switch to instead would be enjoying what you have. And when you're in a growth mindset, enjoying what you have looks like complacency. But when you're enjoying what you have, growth looks like craving and always wanting what you don't have. Then there's externalizing costs, pouring stuff out the back instead of cleaning up after yourself. And the counters of that would be taking responsibility for how your behavior affects others. And from the perspective of externalizing costs, taking responsibility looks like you're going to lose market share and your competitors are going to beat you. So the more that you can cut your costs, the better. Whereas from the perspective of stewardship, of taking responsibility, externalizing costs, pouring mercury in the water looks like cruelty. It looks inhumane. And then there's comfort and convenience. And the counter to that would be getting a joy from your work. And then comfort and convenience looks like entitlement. And I think it would be stable to switch from the three goals that seem to drive our economic system today to these other goals. I mean, I'm sure that that'll create new problems down the road I'm not saying that we'll create peace and harmony forever, but in terms of the total waste in the earth and its poison, how poisonous it is, if we don't change those, I feel like we will end up, Norman Borlaug's quote when he got the Nobel Peace Prize for the Green Revolution, he said, this buys us a little time, but if we don't keep the population from growing, we'll be back here again. And he said, I have faith that we'll figure that out, but here we are.
Yeah, there's certainly a belief, and it's not that it's untrue. It's just a question: is it the most useful belief to say that we'll, as we create these messes, we'll figure out ways to clean them up or to have less mess in the future? And I don't know what the data looks like on that, but to be able to, to be able to look at, again, going back to that aim of environmental stewardship. If we're able to make a difference and increase our, you said market share, efficiency, effectiveness, pricing structure, whatever. So what if we are able to find a means to have all of that, right? So that you can actually grow if that's desirable, but also not destroy the environment in the process. And I think what's missing is the dialogue, the thinking that that's even possible. So again, before Deming, people thought if you're going to have higher quality, you're going to have higher costs. He proved that not to be true. But what's required is thinking differently. Mm-hmm. And that means studying the different ways of thinking so that tests, trials, experiments can be done to do exactly that. And in my experience, when organizations are able to see the new way of thinking, they get hooked and they want to do more. So the way in often, whether it's environmental stewardship or helping a nonprofit serve more of its constituents, the way in is to try something that has a predictive element of success to it that changes the game, because we've seen it through the years. There are very few companies of size that have not adopted at least some of the technical aspects of what Deming taught. And more of them are now adopting the leadership system, the system of profound knowledge that goes along with that. So just thinking differently about performance appraisals, for example, or pay for performance. More and more companies are unhooking from sales commissions because they have started to recognize the negative unintended consequences. So if I take that example and apply it to environmental stewardship, the negative unintended consequences are much of what you're talking about. And some of them are done overtly, so they're not unintended. They're as you say, disposing of mercury in inappropriate ways or not recycling or whatever the alternatives are. Some of those are intended negative consequences or accepted, right? Mm-hmm. Negative consequences, but others are not foreseen. The ripple effects, three, 4 dots downstream, are not seen, and so that cause and effect for most people, if the cause effect is not closely linked in time, it's difficult for people to see it. Mm-hmm. So I think part of the work that you do is to point out that the ripple effects are by far, in some cases, by far more potent and negative than people ever imagined. And that the reverse can also be true, that simple one step at a time leading to the next step can make a huge difference in the world and in a person's life. So it's not only, one of the things that struck me very Deming-like in one of your TED Talks was that combination of feeling that joy, feeling empowered and feeling responsible goes along with it's not making a sacrifice anymore.
Mm-hmm.
It goes along with a higher quality of life. Whereas the traditional model is you have to make a sacrifice. And Deming said, no, you have to think differently. Doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that everything is going to be, unicorns and rainbows. But the aim is to, as much as possible, get win-win, not only for organizations, individuals, but for the environment, for community. That's his suggested aim, even for an organization. But it certainly applies to the world as well.
So hearing you talking about an appreciation for what you've seen of my work in the TEDx talks and presumably this conversation, the easiest thing for me to do would be just to continue what I'm doing. I'm also thinking of what else? I mean, all right, so I'm partway through the New Economics and I started to read Out of the Crisis, but then Kevin suggested I go to New Economics first. So I'll read those. What else can I do? Should I do? Is it working with others who have shifted their thinking and behavior? Or is it taking a course? Or is...
No, that's a great question. That tells me you're, a lifelong learner, and that's powerful. Deming was certainly a lifelong learner. He was still learning at 93 and making use of his knowledge as you're doing. Going back to your tennis analogy, I think it's great, absolutely, to read the books. And there are more books to read, but it would also be great if you were able to attend. We're now doing virtual online seminars, and the Deming Learning Portal will soon be live. But the virtual learning, we pre-COVID did a 2.5-day stand-up seminar several times a year. And that allows you to interact with people and with the facilitators with real examples in real time. And it's kind of an immersion that makes that reading all fit together in your mind. So you're getting the benefit of theory and then seeing the practice. So it's a very dynamic thing. And then just to start to, and one of the things we do as facilitators is help the people who attend the seminar, pick a project that what we say is start with one that's small, right? So, and that's how that's how you started as well with your journey. Is we say, don't try to boil the ocean. Try to boil a cup of water if boiling is desirable. But start small.
We are boiling the ocean.
Yeah, right. Let's not be boiling the ocean, right? But you start small with something, and I don't know if it would address the fashion industry or the food supply chain or what it might address, but you start with an example with a partner with an organization that might be interested. And perhaps because all these things we always see is there is competitive advantage in doing it right for most of these organizations. Not just from a public relations standpoint. There's true competitive advantage from thinking differently about things, including the interrelationship with the environment, and not just to recruit, millennial employees who care about those things. So there are those organizations out there that it may take a little searching to find, but I can think of a few who right now might be interested in working with you on some of these things. They would want you to have the Deming knowledge to start. They would want to make sure that you were all in and committed to do that, so that it's now it wouldn't end up being a waste of time to them. But once you start to get that flywheel moving, and then the next one's easier, and then the next one's after that is easier, just as in your own experience with your own personal life and how you were able to reduce waste.
Yeah, people look at not flying as like they don't even connect it. It's like not possible. And for me, it was just the next step. And the no food packaging or avoiding food packaging, that was a small step after, going way back to stop eating meat in 1990. Then there was avoiding corn syrup and avoiding hydrogenated oil, and then it was avoiding overly processed food. And then so when it was not packaged, it was, I've been doing this a long time. Something else you said hit me like a ton of bricks. If I attend one of these and then I meet people, presumably several of whom have done it, who've learned to think differently, who've transformed their organizations, who raise their kids this way, they've made this transformation. Then if there's a transformation of that scale, magnitude, level of life improvement to be made in an area that they have not made it in, and I have made those changes, but I haven't done the Deming stuff, then we could possibly have two And then let's say it's not the worst collaboration in history. Then presumably there's someone else will do it again within that firm or with the next firm or with someone else within that firm. And then there's the whole community of people who've made and corporations that have made the Deming change that could be on the forefront of making the environmental change, not just because the marketing and hiring the millennials, but for all of the reasons that they can't express when they're trying to say what it's done for them. Then I don't have to do the sale, nor do they have to do the sale to me.
That's correct. It's a win-win collaboration. And there's another thing that's demographically in your favor, which is there are a number of people who are getting older who have all they need more than they need. And now they're looking for a means to give back. They're looking for a means to make a difference in a way that they weren't able to do when they were building a company, acquiring wealth, whatever it is, raising a family. Now they have more time. There's another piece, second part of the answer, though, is because you're a physicist, that control chart thinking, those statistics, and understanding not just at its face value, but the nuances of control chart thinking, and now being able to make a mathematical case around improvement, around cost, around return, that becomes very compelling because it's hard to argue with algebra. It's hard, right? It's hard to argue with statistics that are not manipulated. So it becomes another quiver, another arrow in your quiver to say, let's do the math. Let's do the math. And because of your background, you'll be able to do the math and we can guide you to how that applies to this type of thinking. Maybe it's a food service company or a ingredient supplier or any number of organizations in the food supply chain that might be very useful because they don't want to have waste and they want to do good things for the environment as well. They understand the sustainability, the agricultural model of the soil and nutrients and where their products come from and why they will refuse, many of them refuse to adulterate their products in any way. So they're looking for a means to make that go forward. They just haven't found the consultants who understand what you understand.
Well, this is going to be very excited. I mean, I guess mainly of connecting with the community of people who have had these transformations. I presume do most of them come to you or start this process skeptical? Or I guess it sounds like they start with they expect to save some money and then they come for the money savings and they stay for the life transformation?
Well, in some cases, usually during the course of our work through the decades, we have had a number of companies who've come to us and said, we just want to be better. We just want to be smarter. We just, they may be bored with what they're doing. They're doing well, but it's just not exciting anymore. And so they've heard about Deming, they've heard about something, but they're in the minority. The majority comes with an issue to solve. There's a problem. And their diagnosis was not correct because the solution they applied was not correct. So through word of mouth, they may, many of people come and they don't know anything about Deming yet. They just know that through referrals that these folks might be able to help us. So they reach out to try to find somebody using their network to do that. And it's the same model that I just described to you, which is, so let's just look at it this way and see what happens. Because, we know the theory and the practice, but they're not looking for a 2.5-day seminar. They have a problem they want to solve. And so then the next question is, how did you do that? And we've worked on turnarounds through the years, and all of them are doing well and going forward. And I mention that because turnarounds are a crucible. There's no place for the nice to have. There's no place for theories or practices that do not have win-win results, that do not check all the boxes. So when we're working on turnaround, some of the first things we do is we get rid of performance appraisals. We get rid of commission sales. We break down barriers between departments, get rid of the silos, get rid of these fights about budgets, get fights about turf. They start to be one team and work together. In many cases, they won't do that until they're in great pain. So the turnarounds become a crucible, a way to test Deming's theory like no other. Because there's just, the variables are such that you can just stop doing things, and the companies will let you do that because they've tried everything else. They've tried every traditional thing there is, and they're still not going to be able to make payroll in 3 months or 2 months.
How essential is the CEO or the leader?
In terms of a transformation?
Yeah. Or what's that person's role?
Well, all right. So that's several questions. Deming said the role of the senior leader is I'm oversimplifying, but it's really two things. One is to look out ahead, to scan the horizon, to be looking for opportunities, how to make the pie bigger, what are the innovations that we need to be happening, looking for. And he said, don't worry about your competitor, because if you're worried about your competitor, you're already beaten. So it's not that you're ignoring your competitor, but the point is to try to make the pie bigger through innovation. And then the second thing is to help put everybody in the organization to work on the transformation to the new way of thinking, to the new philosophy of management. So that's the role of the senior leader in an oversimplified nutshell. The role of the manager then is to help do several things. One, help people be successful within the system and processes and procedures, and to be continually improving those, rather than trying to hold individuals accountable, because through the math, through the control chart thinking, we can prove that about 94, 95, 96, 97% of the time, the outputs are the result of the system, not the result of an individual. But yet most HR people are taught to, and other leaders are taught to look and blame people. And they're only about 3 to 6% of the issue. So we're spending 97% of our resources on 3% of the problem. We need to flip that. That's thinking differently. I'm going to suggest to you, and I don't know the answer to this, but I'm going to suggest to you that applying that thinking to environmental stewardship is exactly what has to happen. A lot of times people are analyzing the wrong, they're coming up with the wrong diagnosis. The problem you name is the problem you work on. So it's really important to have some flexibility in how you name a problem. Because otherwise you're going to put your resources on trying to fix something that's not going to have much leverage, or is not the issue at all, right? It's merely a symptom, but it's not a root issue. I don't know if that's helpful or not. But.
Well, I got to tell you that when you were describing the turnaround situation, this crucible situation, I had a lot of thoughts going through my head. One of them was, I want to master this and then head to DC. But that's I think a bit later.
You're young.
Yeah.
No, I mean, you're young. That means you have time to make those changes.
Yeah. I mean, there's not a whole lot of time for the changes to happen in terms of the world, but desperation, I don't think will help.
But there's a snowball effect that can happen. So it happens within organizations, and it happens between organizations as well. So Deming said, for example, if you're an organization, include your customers in your systems view. Include your suppliers in your systems view. It's not just you and your people, right? So in the same with environmental stewardship, we need to be able to include more things into our thinking that are part of our system. And I don't know that I have an environmental example. Yes, I do, actually. And it has more to do with urban design for breathing space, for green space. I mean, these things have been around for a while, but it's only now that we're seeing the students in urban design and landscape architecture, for example, starting to look at how all these inputs fit together to create a community that is both good for people and the environment, right? So that starts to affect everything, whether it's using bicycles instead of automobiles, right? Whether it's making sure that there's more shade to reduce the amount of air conditioning that's needed, or building a design where you don't need air conditioning.
Well, I'll give you, something's popping into my head of naming things. Okay, so people are trying to make closed loop systems. And so they think the challenge is that we haven't closed the loop. We got to close the loop. That's their thinking. But if you expand the system to recognize that there's, at the very least, heat coming out, then suddenly you realize there is no closing the loop. And that's not a problem. But if you want to close the loop, you'll never be able to do it. And besides, it won't get the results you want. If, on the other hand, you include the heat output, and then you still have to include the solar input, Well, then you start seeing nuclear is not a particularly effective solution because it still has waste coming out of it. And however you think it's going to be too cheap to meter, exponential growth will take care of that one pretty quickly. And it's a fossil fuel. It's just a fossil fuel that even if you can take care of the radioactivity and you can take care of the complexity and the risk of breakdowns and so forth, you still run out.
I understand what you're saying, and I'm not disagreeing. And I'm not an expert by any means on the closed loop, open loop systems, but I do have some knowledge of organizations that little by little, at least, and then the snowball effect, were able to not entirely close the loop, to your point, but were able to use those negative outputs. So one of the things that Deming talks about with the view of the organization as a system is you have outputs, and some of them are desirable and some of them are undesirable. So we want to make more of the desirable ones and remove or mitigate the undesirable ones. And that's a process. That's where that plan, do, study, act process comes in. It starts to ask, what if? What if we were to take the heat and do this with it? Is there a benefit some other way so that we are really reducing waste to practically nothing?
Well, that will increase efficiency. And I have to say, efficiency is very important, but
wouldn't it also increase effectiveness, though?
It can increase effectiveness. The thing is that it doesn't solve the problem of, if you don't turn off the spigot, the bathtub's going to keep filling up. And recycling, for example, makes things more efficient. It also creates a new supply of plastic. So you increase the supply, prices are going to drop, and you get individually wrapped apples, which nobody asked for. And then people say, well, it keeps it fresher longer. Well, it's like, well, now you have the apples sitting on the shelf longer. And what we really want, I think, is fresh apples without any plastic. And
that's an example of naming the problem differently, right?
Yeah.
That is key.
Borlaug got it. That yes, efficiency is important. Oh, here's how I put it. There's stories behind it to lead up to it. But if efficiency, there's reduce, reuse, recycle. Reduces, if we're talking about plastic, reducing the supply of plastic means there's less plastic. Reusing and recycling shuffle it around. And so most people get reduce, use, recycle in that order, but in practice, they go for recycling and forget about reducing. Not only is reducing more important, as everybody gets, but most people in practice forget about it. Why? Because who likes to push recycling? Well, Coca-Cola does. Because it increases growth. It's the opposite of reduction. So they sacrifice reduce to increase recycling. Or as I put it, reducing is strategic and reusing and recycling are tactical. And if you don't have a strategy, all the tactics in the world won't get you anywhere. And they may even get you going in the opposite direction. And so many people say to me, Josh, we can't all be perfect like you, but at least we got to try. And it may be small and we're just getting started. But if you focus on tactics without having strategy, or they're counter to the strategy, I mean, that's it. Reducing seems to me strategic.
I get that. And I think, a couple things you mentioned. One is I worry about the perception of...
I'm sorry to interrupt. Efficiency in general is tactical. Under strategy of figuring out how to level off the growth and to the extent we're in an overshoot to reduce it. But without that strategy, the tactic is pointless.
Yeah, well, it's the piece that both Deming and Peter Drucker talked about, which is you can be as effective as possible, but if you're working on the wrong thing,
yeah.
So what? And some folks, Deming folks, business owners who transform their businesses, say that's one of the key things for them is to start thinking differently about strategy, start thinking differently about the design of the system and how it works. But two other things came to mind as you were talking. One is I worry about the fact that so many people somehow look at you and think, I can't do that because he's doing it perfectly and I just don't have time for that, or that's not my interest, or whatever it is. That dynamic is not going to help, right? And I think that's probably your view too. You're not asking them to be like you. You're asking them to start to think differently and find some things for themselves as well,
exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
It's not be like me. So that worries me, of course. But the second thing is the reduce. One of the things we noticed, and I don't know if it's scientifically sound or not, it's above my pay grade, but just going to the grocery store and not being able to take your own reusable, washable bags. There's just so much more plastic being created and used and, I suspect, quote, as you say, tactically recycled. And it's, in a country this size, and I presume that's the policy in most places. And if they don't want people bringing COVID contaminated bags into the grocery store, I get that. But it seems to be a short-term response rather than a strategic solution, I guess.
If only it were merely short term.
Yeah.
It's at best theater, but it's really misguided. I mean, it's making us sicker. But it's also, it's arriving from a thoughtless, I think what you call conventional thinking.
There's another piece that I'm reflecting back on your question of what else you can do. There are a lot of things that fit very well with the Deming philosophy. And so the work of Tversky and Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow, the Nobel Prize winners on how the brain works, useful read, Thinking Fast and Slow. But there's another one, which is the Dunning-Kruger effect, which basically says that, and I think it might be useful to you, which basically says that when we're learning something new, it's typically the case, but not always the case. Once we learn a certain amount, our confidence level of how much we know goes way up because we learn so many new things. And that causes a problem because it means that what we're seeing, let's say just doing 4 square feet, right? 2 blocks, and then on top of 2 blocks, 4 square feet, each is a square foot. And I've learned, say, 3.5 of those blocks. So there's only a half a block left as I see the universe of whatever it is. Playing tennis, learning about Deming, learning about how to be a better steward of the environment. The people who've been working on that topic for a while know that it's really, 10 square feet, right? There are 10 blocks there. And they may have 8 of them figured out, but they know, or 7 of them figured out, but they know there's a lot of unknowns, and there might even be more than 10 blocks. There might be more than 3 they don't know about. There might be 20 blocks total once they dig into it. Now, that's partly your journey. You kept discovering more things that you could learn and do, right? But if I'm back into that effect where I have high confidence because I don't know how big the universe of this topic is, then I'm not going to pursue it. Whereas those folks who can make that transition into the greater understanding of, I know some things, but I also know I don't know a lot of things. That's where the deep learning really starts. And getting folks from that, and they often have less confidence than the folks who have very little knowledge, right? Because if I have very little knowledge, I don't know how big that universe is. If I have a lot of knowledge, I know the universe is much bigger than I ever imagined it would be. So I might not be as confident. So that starts to skew psychology in weird ways. So I need to be more like Josh. Well, that's not what Josh is saying, but that's what I heard Josh say, right? Because I don't have an understanding of how big that universe is of things he's asking me to think about. But you're really giving a few principles to people to think about. And if they do that and enlarge on those, they'll see that there are more unknowns out there, but there are more known knowns as well. Does that make sense?
Well, I'll tell you what's translating in my head is that it almost feels like it's not only blocks, but other things entirely. Because most people, I think, approaches the environment, sustainability from a scientific standpoint, an education standpoint. That if people just know enough information, then they'll act. Which nowhere else does this work. And not much expectation that it would work here. It doesn't work with getting people off of addiction. It doesn't help people get in shape. It doesn't help. And it's much more about emotions.
We see the same thing in when the folks start in the 2.5-day seminar, which is why it's very experiential. We have very little lecture in that seminar because it's really hands-on activities so that it crosses the gatekeeper in the brain that says, this can't be true. How can quality go up and costs go down? That just can't be true. But when they start doing it, then they realize, oh, it is true. Exactly right. But you can't tell them that this is true and you can do it. Yeah, okay. I hear you, but I don't believe you. That's your point, right?
Yeah. It's the issue with the environment. Yes, there's more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere than we can handle. There's more plastic in the oceans and things like that. The solution is not measuring more carbon dioxide. It is not doing more science. I'm a big fan of doing more science. Yes, do not stop. But historically, the voice has come from scientists, journalists, politicians, and educators.
In one ear and out the other.
Well, great. Yeah, it's great information, but their motivations is not, they are not motivated nor trained nor skilled to influence people's behavior, except to buy more newspapers, to vote for them. But they're following others. They're not leading anyone. So there's a big missing component of leaders. And what's missing is, it's much more like, if you want to get in shape, probably more useful to go to a physical trainer than an MD, even though the MD has much more, a bigger education that's more respected by society, but it's not actually what you want if you want to, bench press more.
That's a great analogy.
Well, it's my world.
Yeah.
I mean, we all the reporters go to the scientists in the universities, and universities they're like at the bottom in terms of stewardship, in terms of they have no clue what to do or even what the nature of the game is. They're just going to give you more facts. And when I went up to Lamont Doherty, Columbia's Earth Science Institute, I don't want to overcharacterize it because it's not like I really got to know them very well, but they want to go to the senators and say, this is the law to pass. We know the facts and this is what's right. And you should do this. Well, there's a couple problems with this. One of them is that the fossil fuel companies are saying, we know what's right. Do this. And they have a lot more assets and they have a lot more influence. And who's right and who's wrong depends on your values, because different values mean you value different things. More fundamental to me is that they're trying to circumvent democracy. And I think I want to get them votes. I agree with the science, but I don't agree with the process. And I think that if the cure is worse than the disease, I'd rather go down with the disease than try some authoritarian measure of like forcing stuff on people, which I think gets people to push back.
That triggers a thought about Deming and effectiveness. So he was asked about what's the role of government. And so, here's a guy who helped win the Second World War with his different way of thinking about quality and production and the role of people in jobs, et cetera. But his answer at this particular context was equity, meaning fairness. That the role of government in a democracy is about making sure there's fairness. At the same time, recognizing that there's no such thing, ultimately. Mm-hmm. Right? There's just, it's too fairness, the word fairness is just too subjective. But the pursuit of that is a useful thing, a noble thing. So I'm also circling back then to what if the university, and this is outside of my area of expertise, but what if the university was able to partner with you and an organization that wanted to think differently to now go to Congress and say, we have this organization and maybe 5 others who would like to try this approach, but they need some support to be able to do that, or they need to have some regulations that permit them to collaborate, so it's not seen as anti-competitive behavior. So they're, whether that's a trade association or something else. So that's a pretty big. I don't know if it's boiling the ocean, but it's pretty big. But it starts with some potentially it starts with some collaboration between some organizations that are, it's something we see in business a lot these days. Is more regulation tends to help the larger companies because they have the resources to be able to accommodate those regulations. The smaller companies, that's a huge extra burden on overhead. So the place to look for those partners might be with the smaller, medium-sized companies that are not lobbying for regulations that will help the big guys.
Yeah, there's a funny thing about goals, and it's useful to have something out there to give you direction for your choices today. And yeah, I guess at this point, my head is swimming with the potential. And I think the next step, at least for me personally, is to attend one of these things. I don't know what to expect in terms of, how the exercises will get me to behave and change my thinking. But the feeling of connecting with the community seems like, what's the word? Like huge.
Well, I also, from your TED Talks and the thinking that I heard there is very much in alignment with Deming, because even though we say it's thinking differently, it's really thinking naturally. It comes from something deep within people. And once they understand that if what I want to be doing is holding the system in which people work accountable, so the policies and the procedures and the good training or poor training, and how we onboard people, and how we thank people, and how we work together to figure things out. That all is natural. That collaborative approach feels very natural to most people, whereas trying to hold an individual accountable for the results of the systems does not feel natural. It does not feel natural or good to punish people for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. So a lot of these things that Deming talks about are tap into who we are, our essential nature as humans. So I don't think you're going to find some things that are very much in alignment with what you're thinking, and I believe it will help you even raise your game further, because it is organized in a way that I think, even from the reading you've done, it's organized in a way that's different and useful, and so it causes. I mean, it happened to me, I've heard other people have said it to me. I could feel my brain working. My brain was tingling as we went through this. And that's never happened to me before. And it blew me away. And I mean, one of the things we tell people is you can start doing things the next day, but you'll still have things that you can be doing 25 years from now because of the depth and breadth of what Deming was talking about in that application. And people come back to the seminar 3, 4, 5, 6 times, because every time they come back, they're in a different place, personally and in their businesses. They're in a different place. And so they're hearing things now that they didn't hear. They heard them before, but they didn't process them before.
It sounds almost like it's like art. I mean, what you're describing to me sounds like learning an art.
Well, there are skills related to it, and art certainly has some skills. So, yeah.
Well, I mean, it's when you first start playing piano or going on stage and saying your lines, it's very mechanical, and put this finger on this string and move the bow in this direction, and not too much pressure, not too little pressure. Even before that, it's like, if it's a guitar, this is you turn this little thing and it makes the string tighter. You turn it the other way, it makes it a little looser. And then that sounds very mechanical. This chord, put these fingers in these places and strum like that.
Well, isn't that partly a function of, well, I suppose, of practice, right? Just becoming, getting the psychomotor reactions, if that's what they are, to interact in a way that it's less mechanical, right? So it becomes a part of the instrument. I mean, every great musician I've ever seen, and I would say even true with Pavarotti, right? That voice, that the instrument, whatever it is, it's a part, or even if it's a guitar or a violin or whatever it is, becomes an extension of the neuromuscular system of the body.
Yeah, it's as much as your tongue and lips are when you speak.
Yes. And so I'd say I would agree with you if what you're saying is that it becomes, over time, as you learn a new way of thinking in Deming's approach, your questions get better, your brain gets, I don't know, bigger, better, whatever, but there's greater insight, right? Because diagnosis is better, because now you have you have 4 great tools for diagnosis. What's going on with variation? What's going on with the system? What's going on with human psychology? And how do I know what I think I know is really so, which is theory of knowledge? Those 4 things, I use them, and Deming people use them all day long to figure things out.
When you master you have to master the low levels to get to the middle levels, and so on, until you get to really, when someone masters an art form, they talk about life. There's a story, I would love to have seen it, that of Roger Federer meeting Tiger Woods.
Yeah.
Now, a tennis racket doesn't look much like a golf club, but supposedly they got along famously, and I suspect that they could talk about things that you and I wouldn't quite get. But if Michael Jordan got into the room, or General Petraeus, or pick an art form, Malcolm Gladwell as a storyteller, I think that anyone could walk in and be like, I know just what you're talking about. Oprah, she would, for her, it would be something more about speaking empathetically as opposed to putting the ball on the hoop.
Yeah, it's a very high level of mastery, right? And one of the nice things about Deming is that you can improve whatever it is you're setting out to improve right from the get-go, without having, I guess to put in the analogy of, Roger Federer, you're going to win a bunch of tennis matches right away. Right away. You don't have to have that match. You're not going to win Wimbledon right away, but you're going to start where you are and make a difference. And that's life. That's excitement. That's intrinsic motivation. That's joy to be able to start making a difference, even at that initial level.
And that comes from something inside that the technique liberates. It doesn't create.
I think that's exactly true. Right. I don't like to refer to Deming's philosophy as technique. There are certainly approaches and methods within the body of work. But your point is the same. It taps into what you have.
Yeah.
It brings forth, it allows you to be all you can be. And that makes me think of Maslow. Maslow. Most people know about the pyramid, right? Self-actualization is at the top of the pyramid, hierarchy of needs. But very few people have actually read what Maslow said about it. So, we start at the bottom with satisfying the safety needs, right? Our cave is safe and we have a tool to beat back the saber-toothed tiger or whatever it is. We have food. And as you move up in that pyramid to the top, and this is what I was saying before, in terms of those folks who are at a point in their lives where they want to self-actualize, they want to be all they can be. And what they recognize in themselves, I believe, and this is what Maslow said, which most people don't know about Maslow, is to be all you can be, you have to help others be all that they can be. You cannot truly self-actualize just by self-actualizing yourself. So we've encountered folks who said, well, Maslow says, I need to be all that I can be. Yes. And to do that, you have to help others be all that they can be. And that may have something to do with environmental stewardship as well. Because if I have lead, my brain, the children's brains are going to be affected by that. Or if I'm breathing pollutants, right? So that pyramid of being all that you can be, it depends in part on the stages of a person's life and their circumstances as well. You've chosen to do it younger. You're young.
Just turned 49. So still got half left.
Yeah.
If you like the show, I recommend acting, as my guests do. It works best with someone supportive, your spouse, parents, kids, neighbors, or friends. Learn the 4-step process I do with my guests and describe in my TEDx talks and do it together. You'll find yourself acting on something you care about, something meaningful. Whether you start big or small doesn't matter. If you care, if it's meaningful, you'll keep doing it. You'll reach big. Eventually, stewardship will feel normal. You'll wish you had started earlier. Second, I recommend donating to help this podcast at joshuaspodek.com/donate. I promote degrowth and stewardship, which no advertiser will touch, but brings joy, community, connection, and abundance to you when you act, and global change in the long run. Help us keep going. That's joshuaspodek.com/donate. Okay, I'm swimming in stuff now. I want to process it. So I want to walk you through the process that we talked about before, about that you saw in the TEDx talk. So the environment, is it something, I take it it's something meaningful for you, but I better make sure.
Of course. Yeah, no, absolutely. Yes.
So when you think about the environment, especially if you think about your action, your behavior with respect to it, what do you think about? What are some things that come to mind?
Well, it's a big one for me because nature in itself is very nurturing for me and very inspirational and very spiritual experience for me, as is clean air and clean water and sustainability and I guess protecting the earth, right? So that those things can continue.
When you say spiritual, or nurturing, my first thought is maybe you've had some experiences where you felt reborn or something ethereal.
Every time I go into nature, I feel reborn. I live in the city. I grew up in the country. So going into the country, going into especially trees for me, trees and water, lakes, even more than the ocean. My breathing is deeper. I think my pulse both speeds up and slows down, if that makes sense, right? There's an excitement, an acceleration, but also a serenity. There's just nothing else. I suppose it's releasing all kinds of endorphins. I don't quite know how that works, but it's very powerful for me.
Can you walk me through, is there a specific case that comes to mind, or has it happened recently, or is there a first time?
Well, the first time probably would have been a long time ago, but there's a place where we go. Well, we're not this year on vacation up in the Great Lakes in Michigan. That's a little known park, so I'm not going to give you the name of it. I don't want to be overrun by New Yorkers. But everything there, from the minute you go through the gate, I mean, it's just a walkthrough, right? There's a little gravel parking lot for a handful of cars. You can see Lake Huron. You smell the trees. The air is clean. There's usually a breeze. Whether it's in the sun or the rain, it's just magical. It's just a magical thing. It puts one in touch with oneself and with others. I think it's and then talked about the well of humanity, right? It helps put my feet into the well of humanity as well into the well of the environment. It sounds crazy, I know.
It sounds spiritual. It sounds like a rebirth. And I'm going to digress for a second, not digress, but regress to something you said earlier about Maslow. And you talked about my language here, not yours. So sorry if I get it a little bit off, but there's a service component that you can't just actualize yourself. I would say we're a social species. And I believe that there's a third leg to that stool. There's yourself, there's others, and there's nature. And that is not an add-on. And that's something we've put off for a long time as a culture, as a species. And I'm saying this a bunch. I'm working with Spartan Race. I don't know if you know them, but they do obstacle courses on weekends, and people challenge themselves and have to work very hard. And people think for some people it's probably fun. You get muddy, you crawl through the mud underneath the barbed wire, jump over the fence, work with teams. But the people who really get it, it's about heart and mind, body and soul, and only by challenging yourself. Sitting on the couch just doesn't do it. Their goal is to get 100 million people off the couch and living. And I'm saying to them that there's a third component. There's mind, body, there's nature. And when you were talking about Maslow, I was thinking this third leg, I think it's inseparable. And we can separate it, but at our loss.
That certainly works for me. I'd never thought about that. That's very provocative. I want to reflect on that because I think that hits home.
There's some books that I've read on nature before humans. It's unbelievable. I mean, people go to Maine so they can see a whale. There are captain's reports where there were whales as far as the eye could see for days on end. There were ships before steam sailing across the Atlantic Ocean would get stopped in the middle of the ocean because the sea was so dense with fish. No land in sight. In the middle of the ocean, it's so dense with fish that the ships are just stuck. We think of Africa as the nation with the biggest wildlife. North America, before humans arrived, I'm not talking Europeans, I'm talking what we call Native Americans. The wildlife here was much bigger than there.
That's amazing.
It was like incomparably more. And of course, everywhere we show up, the big things get eaten. It's ironic that the place where we were first, it's speculated that the large animals exist because they evolved with us. We didn't just show up on the scene. And so they knew to be scared. They knew to keep away from us or adopt whatever behaviors, protections worked for them. Whereas the other places, we just showed up and they all went the way of the dodo, including the dodo. So learning about that, like thinking to keep what we have now is like a minor goal. To get to what these feelings of our emotions of joy and discovery and all these things, they're not new. Our ancestors had them too, but I don't think we have it as much. I don't think that we actually experience these things as much as they did.
Yeah. Not only that, I think if you've not grown up with the access to nature, it can feel very weird and scary.
Yeah.
I remember meeting a fellow who part of his giving back was to take inner city kids in LA up into the mountains. They'd never seen the stars. It's unfathomable to me.
What I really want to do is bring nature to the city and take an abandoned building and make it into a park. And because, yes, it's great to escape it, but better we don't have to escape in the first place. So back to you. That was my digression or regression.
Yeah.
Based on what you described, these feelings that you felt, and I suspect kind of feel now, I invite you at your option to think of something to do to act on those feelings, the feelings that nature brings up in you. And most people hear something different than I asked. I'm not saying what's the biggest or most important thing that you could do, or what does the New York Times suggest, or the Greenpeace. It's not about the world. This is about you, to do something that you want. And the constraints are, it has to be something that you do with your own hands. So, because so many people say, oh, I got a team, I'll get them to do it. Well, Deming, you can't outsource quality. You can't delegate that. So it has to be something you do. It has to have, you don't have to measure it, but it has to have some measurable effect. So reading and learning and raising awareness, that's great, but don't stop there, because the environment doesn't react to those things. It reacts to your behavior. And it has to be something new. So a lot of people, there's a lot of stuff that they're already doing. Great. No problem with that. But this is going to be something new that you add on to that. And I can guarantee you that after you do it, you'll be glad you did. As for how long or how big or small, that doesn't matter. It can be trivial. Actually, I'll share with you, I haven't talked about this for a while. One guy, he was just going to turn his cell phone off earlier each evening. And I was like, cell phones don't use a whole lot of power. That's like almost the smallest amount. And then I talked to him a little while later, and he's like, the screen broke. And instead of fixing it, he just extended it. And it became about spending time with his wife and dog and going to the beach together. And so as you heard me say on the third TEDx talk, it's not how big or small it is. It's if it's meaningful. If it's meaningful, it'll happen again, and then it'll get big automatically. So I wonder if anything comes to mind.
Not at this moment, I have to confess, because you put me in touch with something that's much bigger than, in terms of the emotion, than I was aware of from having just watched your TED Talk, for example. Mm-hmm. So the way you just walked me through that experience, to me, there has to be, I want to reflect on a spiritual aspect. That's a piece that I've certainly verbalized before, but you were able to capture it and frame it in a way that is much more meaningful to me. So I'm kind of reeling from that a bit, which is nice. It's a great feeling.
Yeah, me telling people how delicious my food is just does not capture how delicious the food is. Like, I have these cherry tomatoes here, and I know the farmers. I go to the farm every year. I hope we can make it this year. It's usually on Labor Day. I don't eat for like 24 hours before I go there, and I exercise that morning to maximize my hunger. And there I will take the cherry tomatoes, and I will, because they pick them early. So when I get there, it's the ones that like somehow didn't get picked. And I, without taking it off the plant, put the cherry tomato in my mouth and eat it while still connected, because in that second, it's possible that a little flavor is lost. And then I do that with like about every single one I can. Last year, the cherry tomatoes weren't around, and it was tomatillos. There were a lot of, which I love. Most people don't know you can just eat them raw, but they hurt my throat. They do this scratchy thing in my throat. So I ate as many as I could until it was painful. Then I ate a few more because they taste so good. But I can say that.
But this might be a good bookend for you. Dr. Deming, one of his hobbies was growing tomatoes. I don't know if you knew that.
I didn't know that, but yes. I have my tomato plant over there in my apartment.
Yeah, growing tomatoes.
Now, you're par for the course, though, for not immediately seeing what to do.
Yeah.
But I know from experience, I believe from experience, that the best thing to do now is to find something to do that ends up a SMART goal that will take if you just think about it and reflect, great.
Yeah.
But when your hands get involved, it will, I don't think I have to tell you that it will take it to another level.
I don't disagree with you. I just don't.
So when's the last time, I want to bring something else in. You contrasted those feelings with being in the city.
Yeah.
And oftentimes that contrast helps. Because when was the last, do you remember a time recently or any time when you felt like this is the city and I need more country? Or when those feelings, when you thought about going there, or you thought like, this is the sort of thing I need to go there for, or something like that?
Well, I'm happy. I love living in the city as well, and have been able to, so maybe this, I don't know. I have, one of my hobbies is doing sort of landscaping, and we have a quarter of an acre here in the city. So it's not really a garden, it's a woodland. We have, in that small space, we have 8 trees, 8 and oak and ginkgos, and large white cedar. So it's really a woodland rather.
Male ginkgo or female?
No, all male.
So no seeds?
No seeds.
Okay.
No stinky seeds.
I just foraged some in the city. I was going and I saw, ginkgo plants. And I learned that you could forage them. So I brought them home and I cooked them and I ate them. And I was very happy.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Ah, I didn't know that.
I'm really getting into foraging. You should see me with the berries. And I won't tell people where they are. If you come next time you come to New York, I'll take it foraging.
That'd be great. No, I'd like that.
I've barely scratched the surface, but I know the ones that I like.
Oh, that sounds great. No, I'd like that. So maybe it has something to do with, and part of the reason we planted all those trees was not just for the aesthetic effect, but for the shade-giving properties and the carbon dioxide, et cetera. I mean, it was a part of the plan to do that. So maybe I just need to plant some more things. There is some space out there still. Does that qualify?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Wouldn't if you hired someone to come and do it for you?
No, I do it myself. I mean, I had the oak was large, 5-inch caliper when we brought it in, so that did require a crew. But I did help, yeah. But everything else I've planted myself. So
did this conversation prompt you to think about planting more? Or is planting more something that was?
No, it's always on my mind, but it's been so hot here that planting more now is not the time. It's the autumn to do the next round. So being grounded by COVID in the spring, I was able to really dig in the dirt and plant, I don't know, probably 50 new perennials around the yard. But there's room for another 50, I think, if I plan carefully.
So let's make it a SMART goal. And
okay.
Because what I'll say is we'll get it to a certain point where it's clear what to do. And then I'll ask, how about to schedule when we'll talk about it afterward?
Okay, sure.
So how long do you think it'll take to get enough things planted, which might be one, or might be just, I don't know, whatever, to where if I ask you how did it go, you'll be able to say something happened.
Well, I would say once the weather cools off, I'm not sure I understand the question, but it's I can plant one thing in 20 minutes probably. But I can, if I spend a half day, I can plant 20 things perhaps.
Well, this is where it's up to you, because I know from experience that if you said, I'm going to do it quick and easy, I'm just going to say, I'm going to plant one thing today, and Josh, you can talk to me tomorrow. I know that will change, that will make the 20 faster anyway, if you want to do the 20, or you'll figure out you don't want to do it, but something will happen in doing that one.
Well, yes.
I'm not saying you should do the one. I mean, it might be that you want to do 20 or 50.
No, I'm happy to do 10 or 20, but I can't do it until the weather changes.
So that's fine.
Once it gets a little cooler, I can prepare the soil.
So you know gardening more than I do.
Well, I don't know.
And what do you think? How many? It sounds to me like the number of things and...
Let's say 10.
Okay, so if you plant 10 things, do you need to name now what they would be, or that's something you would come up, that would be part of the process?
I would say heliobores and perhaps some rhododendrons.
You remind me, my mom loves her rhododendrons.
Okay.
And each time you talk about heat, you remind me that I've been meaning to plant some jalapenos or habaneros for a while, but I'll get around to that. Actually, I keep getting inspired back by my guests, and I keep talking to people about doing things, and then it gets me to do stuff that I've been putting on that's been on the back burner for me. Okay, so it sounds like you know what you want to plant, how many you want to plant.
Mm-hmm.
When would be a good time to schedule a conversation for how that went? And if it's after September or October or whatever, I don't know what the right time is, then so be it.
Yeah, I would say November, just to be safe, because I want to plant these things when it's still really hot.
So then I'm sure we'll talk between now and November, but after we hang up, I propose that we get at the calendars and schedule a second conversation.
Okay.
And now I've been kind of nudging you here.
Mm-hmm.
What's the motivation behind doing this? Is it because of me?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I was looking forward to the autumn in any case. I didn't figure I'd be flying again every week or every other week this year. So I was already looking ahead to the autumn to do that. So the motivation is to continue to work on the woodlands.
Okay. Yeah, I always like to make sure people like doing this stuff, I think.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if other people would like to garden.
No, I like digging in the dirt.
Yeah.
I like seeing things grow as well.
So here's where I say, how do you think you'll feel doing this? And how do you think you'll, when I ask you how it went?
I think I'll feel great about it. I think I'll feel a sense of accomplishment. and joy that it looks good. And I think I'll have gratitude for having the wherewithal to have the land to do that with, and feeling lucky.
Now, I predict that all sounds awesome, and I predict it will be significantly greater than that.
Okay.
And even if you take into account the words that I just said, it will still be greater than that.
Can you give me an example?
Me talking about the cherry tomato, like I knew the cherry tomatoes tasted better when you got them off the vine than when you get them at a salad bar.
Right. Yeah.
But I can't tell until I taste it. And then I taste these things, and I just have to stop what I'm doing and pause for 30 seconds to just let the flavors mingle.
Yeah.
And I suspect that there'll be also a component. How many people live in your home?
2.
So there'll be a component of you and the other person.
My wife.
That
yes.
will.
Yes.
You and your wife will get
Yes.
involved with this. There'll be you and the person at the store. There'll be you and thinking
Right.
of someone else is going to live in this house somewhere down the road. And
Right.
these other components come into play, and these things that it's so much greater what stewardship means that we can't tell until when we do it, it all becomes, this is what drives me. This is why I love what I do. It's this lost thing that you know better than I do because you described the experience up by Lake Huron. That's what you're going to get. When I'm picking up garbage every day,
Yeah.
I'm connecting with Yosemite.
I see. Cool.
And I'm connecting with people who live in the Philippines because it's the same ocean. And that's why.
Yeah. No, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you. And let's wrap up here. I like to stop at the end. I like to ask if there's anything I didn't think to ask that's worth bringing up, or anything you want to say directly to listeners.
No, I'm generally excited for you and to continue this conversation as you learn more about Deming, because it's your passion and insight and intelligence and what you already know, combined with the Deming's different way of thinking, I think is a very powerful combination. It will be very powerful. I think I would reflect back to you the same thing, which is you're going to have ahas that you didn't know were possible. So just like with me doing the planting, you're going to have cherry tomatoes writ large. I mean, whatever the analogy would be.
Yeah, I can say that transforming Japan, if that's not speaking too glibly, is something that's outside of my horizon right now. I believe that it's attainable,
yeah,
and desirable and enjoyable. And I think people, if that happens with the United States on the way to happening with the world,
yeah,
I think everyone in the United States, I think overwhelmingly people would be overjoyed at that transformation. And yeah, so there's a lot of aha moments between now and where I feel like I can be a major
Right.
part of that.
Yeah.
There's a question I wanted to ask earlier, and I hope you don't mind if I tack it on at the end, is that I think that if I tap into this community and I connect with people who, when you're talking about the turnarounds, you spoke with such experience. It was clear that you've been through situations like this. We had to get rid of the performance space and all that. And I thought, man, I would love to work with someone who has been through that enough that they can they know the turnaround part. They don't know the stewardship part. And I thought, I can't wait to see it in action because I want to see it once or twice, be a part of it, bring it to other places. Am I flattering myself or not flattering myself to think that they will get from me just as much as I get from them?
Oh, I don't really has anything to do with flattery. I think that's the Deming model is the win-win collaboration. And if it doesn't look like that, then it shouldn't happen. Because win-lose, as Deming pointed out, there's no such thing really for very long as win-lose. It becomes lose-lose. So it's either win-win or lose-lose. And so when we go, even in the case for turnaround, when we go into a turnaround, we've turned some down because we didn't think there was enough runway left to land the plane. In other words, they had not enough resources, and we did not want to be taking their money that could be going to payroll or other things if we didn't feel we could help them. So in other words, we did our analysis and said, we can do this. We can help these people. But if the analysis is it's too late, then we bow out because that would be dishonest. I don't know, it would be dishonest. It would be against our value system to start down something we didn't think we could be successful at.
Okay, so people who've done this would say, Josh has something interesting there. And if it works for them, they'll expect this will be win-win. And if it won't, they'll say, good luck.
There'll be robust discussions about how do we get started? What would it look like to get started? And if that's successful, and then what might be the next little thing to try? And pretty soon the momentum starts to build and you have more things going on and more momentum going. And then pretty soon it becomes a self-reinforcing cycle. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but that's how it works.
Yeah, I tend to think of when you take initiative on something, an entrepreneurial project, for example. Yeah, there's a stage where it takes on a life of its own, where I don't know if this is the best way to say it, but if one of the people gets hit by a bus, it will keep going, even if it was the person who started it.
Right. You've created a system to keep it going.
Yeah. All right. I know that we could go on for another 6 or 7 hours.
That'd be fun.
So I'll wrap up here, and I look forward to following up both the recordings and also with the workshops.
All right.
Well, Kelly, Allan, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me. It was great fun. Appreciate it.
After we finished recording, we already started following up with whom to talk to next. I didn't dream before this conversation that there might already exist a community of organizations and people who have transformed similarly to what I'm talking about in stewardship in other areas that would love to transform again in this new way, new for them. I thought about finding people and organizations with the biggest demand, the biggest potential for change, that I was most connected to, or other ways, but I hadn't thought of people or organizations most skilled at systemic change, beginning with personal transformation, nor of connecting with someone at the middle of such a community who also loves that kind of experience. Maybe this is the beginning of a big initiative, a new direction to work with, a new community to work with. I suspect I'll learn as much as anyone. How many people are bringing a message of joy from what everyone calls saving the environment, but I call the future? Step by step, this podcast is creating a culture of joy, community, and connection around sharing and acting on our environmental values. Again, there's no profit in buying and wasting less, but we'll all love our lives and relationships more when we do. I can use your support. Please donate at joshuaspodek.com/donate. Again, that's joshuaspodek.com/donate.